series of books that she co-authored and designed and published, and they're called Graphic Design and it's a series of books that look at graphic design at the intersection and kind of what it does in the context of graphic design and politics, graphic design and religion, graphic design and mathematics, and so on. And when I saw this, I was naturally super excited about this project because this is very much in tune also what my idea for this space is that we kind of expand the idea and the way we look at graphic design at the intersection and the overlaps with other disciplines. So, you know, naturally I was very drawn to that, saying, oh my God, that's this person who's been exactly kind of looking at all these kind of intersections with graphic design. And some of these books are here on one of the side tables of our bedroom setup of this exhibition. So yeah, let's look at them there. Because also, you know, why I was thinking about these overlaps, there's also this thing that I feel like we really cannot afford to stay in a very small specialized bubble anymore. I think we really have to kind of see how, you know, to kind of reflect on graphic design in a much broader sense in the way that it affects society and our doing and the world around us, by really kind of finding ways that we can kind of cross over to other disciplines, collaborate, share knowledge, and connect with other disciplines. So I think this is also vital, in my view, for graphic design today. And so meeting Lucienne, I got to know a person in designer full of life and energy who keeps questioning her role, her own role as a graphic designer. Kind of really questioning what is her responsibility, what's her role, and she has the openness and the curiosity to kind of change her way she works and change the way she thinks about graphic design and kind of scrutinizing her responsibility within the field. And I really feel that this is also a way that our practice, also each one of us as a practitioner in our practice, can really stay kind of engaged and fresh. That we really keep asking ourselves what we are doing and why and what it kind of, what effect it has. And I find it very inspiring also then to have someone, Lucienne, and I think we need more role models who really question what we do within graphic design. And I think we especially need a lot more women to kind of really show that even, you know, after, like Lucienne, 30 years of practice, that we would like not settle in and say, okay, now I know how it goes, but to really actually push and think and re-question what it is that we are doing. So thank you for that. And Lucienne brings another wonderful aspect to her work, which I admire a lot, and this is her sense of humor. And so for this exhibition, in fact, her way of reflecting on what is my role and how do I see myself within graphic design, my responsibilities, she actually wrote a love letter. She wrote a love letter to her long-standing partner, graphic design, where she kind of raises all the questions and doubts and troubles and you know, relationship difficulties she's been having and facing over the many years of her practice. And I think, you know, it's, as we all know from our personal relationships, the moment we you know, the ups and downs really make us actually in fact question and we think and we appreciate, or maybe just sometimes walk out of a relationship, so that's cool. So as far as the love letter is concerned, there is pads that you'll see now, it's so crowded. There are pads here on the table on the side, with the love letter on the one side and a blank letter on the back. So you're all invited to write your own letter to graphic design, kind of reflecting on your own personal relationship to this. Is a brilliant one from you. You appear to be having an affair with somebody else. And then the idea is that we can kind of collect them all here on the wall, and you can stick them on the wall. So that's part. And as I said, I'm super, super happy that Lucienne can really be here today. And I want to thank her very, very much for this amazing idea and this exhibition. And you know, now for some of you who came late, it's probably hard to see what's actually happening here. So you know, afterwards, like once everybody is out after the talk, you'll see. And I also want to thank a furniture manufacturer here from Berlin who kind of kindly lent us their beautiful beds. Of course, it's also not within a graphic design exhibition. We don't often need beds, but they helped us out on that. And I also want to thank Jens and Lynn and Johanna and Eva for all their help and support in making this possible. So before I hand over to Lucienne, just two things. Like after the talk, maybe you could be kind enough to put the stools just upstairs to the right so that we have really space to move around. And as always, there'll be drinks and time to talk to us, to Lucienne, together, to mingle, and to stay here. And oh, and one last thing, sorry, exactly, Johanna just asked me, we are streaming live on Instagram, as you might know, maybe you read it. So I hope everything is fine with this, and we're also taking some pictures for documentation. Is everybody fine with this? Yeah? I guess with the mask we're not going to recognize it. So. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so it's called The Personal is the Political, and it will become apparent why I've called it that. But just a little bit about me. So I run a small studio in London. We've ended up concentrating a lot on exhibition design, books, and a certain amount of work for NGOs and charities. And as Anya said, I'm also co-founder of Graphic Design And, which we define as an advocacy initiative. So we're advocating for what graphic design can do. So this is clearly a very personal project. There's a bed in the middle of the room. So that's to sort of signal about this relationship, and it's an intimate and quite obsessive relationship sometimes, and quite a difficult relationship sometimes, and that's what I'm exploring. And in terms of the letters, there's a letter from me to Graphic Design over here, which is kind of exploring should we break up? That's really. And then there's a letter, there's a reproduction of the letter over here, but annotated by Graphic Design, which actually was the hardest thing to do, to sort of get myself for it not to sound like it was me, you know, to have a different tone of voice. But I think it kind of pulls it apart a bit in quite a useful way. So as I say, it's a very personal project. These sort of summarise how I felt doing it. So, you know, sad, oh my God, I can't cope with this, actually I do still love you, you know, no, you're doing really crap things, I can't be involved with you anymore, oh, you're so stupid, oh no, you're brilliant, etc., etc. Okay. So there's a picture of Woody Allen here, who, putting aside what people might feel about him personally, I'm a huge fan of his films, and I went to see him speak at the NFT. It's made of wood, obviously, by the way, this illustration. But I went to see him speak at the NFT, and he said something that really resonated with me, which was that he wanted his work to be a quality distraction. And what he meant by that was a kind of distraction from all those existential questions. Why am I here? What's the point? And actually, I asked myself that question a lot, and I asked myself that question in relation to graphics a lot. Where does the value lie in what I do? So I have this real wooden version of him, actually, on my desk. And just to remind me that I'm trying to make sure that not only is the work a distraction, but it has some qualities. The question is, what is it that gives it quality? So, onto the political stuff. For me, part of what gives it quality is that I think it's a political act. I think it's a really important thing to do. Graphic design is everywhere, it's used by everyone, and it touches on every subject. So that seems to me to come with a responsibility, which is what I find exhilarating about it, but it's also frightening. So I recently saw Mike Monteiro, who's an American designer, talk about that very thing, and here he is, and he was completely uncompromising about it, and he summed it up so much better than me, because he said at this talk, design is always political. Every choice we make is political. Who we work for, the problems we choose to solve, the decisions we make while solving those problems. The people we involve, the people we exclude, the people who benefit from our work, and the people it punishes. Design is always political, and that's absolutely what I believe to be the case. So that's why this is a project that is about the personal and the political. Now obviously the other component here is that I'm getting older, and so I've got less time now to think about these things, and I'm focusing really, really hard, therefore, on what do I do next, what is it that gives it value. And then we've had COVID, and obviously we've got climate change, so I'm thinking a lot about existential crises of many kinds. And that's why we've had this in our studio. So these are flowers that you would normally see at a funeral. In fact, they might say dad, which is, you know, but anyway, we ordered them to say dead. And we've had them in our studio decaying. It took a long time, actually. We were photographing them as they decayed. And then we made this little animation of them. But partly, really, because we're interested in rebirth, you know, the reinvention. What could we become next? And so every now and again we look at this, and this is another one of those kind of, yeah, okay, long time dead. What are we going to do? Got to make the most of being alive now. So in the letter, I talk about how I was young when I first met graphic design, and what a sort of utopian idea graphic design was to me. And there's no better place to talk about in relation to that than where I live. There are two other people in the room who live there also, and who will share some of this feeling. And this is the Barbican in London, which is a housing complex. There's 2,000 flats, but it's also an art centre. And it was built in the 1960s, as was I. And it seems to me to kind of epitomise the feeling of the time, which was that, you know, design can make the world a better place. So I get up in the morning and I'm reminded every day of those ambitions, if you like, those ideals. And I've carried them with me all the way through since I was very little. Now the other reason I've done that is because of my parents. So my dad was a typographer. He was a practitioner, and he also taught in the Department of Typography at Reading. He's the guy right at the back with the tie on, who's bald. Both of my parents really talked a lot about politics when I was young. So, and he talked about it in relation to design. But his background, you know, he'd come from quite a poor family. He campaigned for the Labour Party in 1945 as a very young man. And he was very proud of having done that. And of course, we Brits thank the Labour Party for our National Health Service. So, so I was brought up thinking, you know, politics, really important. These are the things that define quality of life for everybody, actually. And he was talking about design, so I was kind of interested in how do you marry these things together. And my mum, here on the left, she was born in Vienna, and she came to the UK in the 1930s. She was from a Jewish family. And when I was sorting through family possessions, because they both died now, I found this clipping from 1934. And the fact that she kept it was just like, yeah, of course, that she talked to me a lot about persecution, inequality, all those issues, and being a woman. You know, so all of that has fed into my way of thinking also. And of course, they talked about this. I don't really need to explain why. But I was really, even as a kid, it seemed like, wow, this is really these are great ideas. These people got, you know, and I got very interested in ideas actually, mass production, mass consumption, the spreading of ideas, the crossovers of disciplines, all of these things. It felt like, God, this is really dreamy. This is great. And my parents went to the Central School and in London. That's where they met. So my mum was an illustrator. My dad a typographer. I love this print. This is from 1929 when they were not there, obviously. But what I love about it is they met on the stairs. My parents, as you can see the stairs. And my mum would have been at the top in design and illustration, and my dad would have been there at the bottom in typography. So, and then I ended up going to the Central School. This was the prospectus that really made me want to go. The work of a typographer who's had a great influence on me, Anthony Froschow. So, what did I think when I got there, and who did I think more about, and what informed my work? Well, there's a designer called Ken Garland, who's recently died actually, but of my parents' generation, who was very political, and actually that's mainly in many ways, that's the reputation that will be carried through about him. And in 1964, so I was just a really tiny little thing, I was 2, he wrote this, First Things First, and it was a manifesto. It was a call on graphic designers to take more responsibility for the work you do, to think harder about who you work for, to think harder about those messages that you are helping to spread and amplify. So when I got to college, I found out about this and I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. And it was reissued in 2000 and I was one of the signatories. He was also, amongst many other things, involved with CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, so I was very interested by all of that as well. So that was work from the 60s. Work from the 70s, very interested by Sister Mary Carita from LA, the grooviest nun imaginable, as far as I can see, a graphic designer nun, quite cool. Known for her fantastic silk screen prints and actually the way she drew on sort of popular culture at the time, but always with a heart and always with a political message. So we've got Stop the Bombing, that's to Vietnam, and issues around race on the right. And then the person who influenced me a lot in the 1980s was David King, another very political designer, again very engaged in issues around equality and race, and he was the art director of City Limits, which was a bit like Time Out, but was the more alternative version. And I went to see him as a student, you know, and again, massive influence. So it's not a big surprise that in 2006 I wrote this book, Good, An Introduction to Ethics in Graphic Design. Fantastic experience, drew upon lots of designers' work, but also went to talk to a philosopher and a politician and a bishop and a member of the House of Parliament to talk about ethics, their version of ethics, and then to go away and think about how that might relate to graphics. So I thought a lot more about freedom of speech, for example. You know, I had the philosopher say to me, would you work for the Conservative Party? And I said, no. And he said, and you don't believe in freedom of speech? I was like, oh God, that's much more complicated than I thought. He talked about quality of life and aesthetics, the role of aesthetics in quality of life, that was great as well. I talked to a barrister who talked to me about work ethics. You know, I didn't realise that barristers had what's called the cab rank rule, which is that they take the first job that comes along. It's got nothing to do with whether you think someone's guilty or not, because obviously they're meant to be innocent to proven guilty. But I thought, oh, you know. Anyway, so that was great, really, really good. So I'm going to break off for a sort of interlude, as it were, by showing you a really, really, really recent piece of work. I have this amazing position at the University of Southampton in the engineering department there. They secured funds for 2 visiting professors who are not engineers to come in and teach their students something they think the students should know about, but they as engineers don't feel best placed to talk about. And so I'm working there as a communications expert to try and help their students convey their ideas more effectively. And the other visiting professor is a climate change sustainability expert. And so we work together on this piece of animation, which is aimed at the next in-tech students really, and kind of empowering them and making them think a bit harder about what they do as engineers in relation to the climate, which I just found absolutely fantastic, because our conversations were about how engineers have historically sort of pitted themselves against the planet. You know, we can go deeper, we can go higher, it's all about performance. Now we've got to rethink it. So I'm just going to show you this as a little interlude before I get back to the main thing. So now, right back to where I started. when I was a teenager, there was this magazine called Jackie, and it made me really, really unhappy because it kept telling me about makeup and boys, and I really didn't care about either of those things particularly, and I was overjoyed when I discovered feminism. And Anya mentioned humour. This is just the best poster ever. If it were a lady, it would get its bottom pinched, and the graffiti says, if this lady was a car, she'd run you down. I thought, well, that's more interesting. So when I left college, the first place I worked was a publisher, a feminist publisher called the Women's Press, and their logo was an iron, as in a women's press. It was a play on words, obviously, and every title page said steaming ahead on it, and a picture of an iron. More humour, which is great, and that's one of the book covers that I worked on for them. And then I got very interested in women's health, so I started working for Breakthrough, which was a breast cancer charity. And I also started to think more and more about, displacement and immigration, all these things that have become very current, of course. And in 2015, worked on this touring exhibition called On Solid Ground, which was all about refugees. And what was interesting about that is that as a way of sort of demonstrating that graphic design is important and makes a difference, it toured all the way through Europe, because it was these sort of tent-like structures carrying photographs and text from different people who'd recent refugees. And it got vandalised quite badly. It got cut and burnt and all sorts of things. And although that was incredibly shocking for all of us, and it had to be remade several times, if ever it said, actually what we do as graphic designers is important, it was this. But that brings me on to graphic design and really that, I love doing client work, or sometimes clients can be annoying, of course, as we all know, but I love being engaged, I love doing the client work, but I really wanted to take a bit more ownership, in a way, of the work that I was doing. So my friend and colleague Rebecca Wright, who's a dean at Central St Martin's, we came up with this idea of graphic design and so the idea was that we would publish books and initiate projects that foregrounded what graphic design does in relation to the rest of the world. So we produced books around politics, religion, health, literature, social science, and mathematics. And that was great. And then, because I'd done quite a lot of work in health, and I'd worked a lot for the Wellcome Trust, which is in London, it's a body that funds a lot of health research, and it also has an exhibition space. We went to them and said, well, we want to do an exhibition about graphic design and health. And they said, yes. And then we said, we want to call it Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? Thinking they'd go, you're kidding. And they said, no, that's fine. So here's the June poster for that project. And I still would count this probably as the project I'm most kind of proud of, really. So this is outside the Wellcome. People were greeted by a flashing pharmacy sign that said, Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? In terms of the kind of projects that we included, they were drawn from many periods. It was very international. This is just a kind of shorthand way of talking about them, really. On the whole, they showed the benefit of graphic design within that space. We did talk about smoking, though. We did talk about the responsibility of graphic designers in selling cigarettes just as much as the opposite. So we were kind of honest. But the scale of the exhibits varied enormously. We went from ambulance livery right through to condom packets, and we had, state-funded AIDS-related projects and charity projects, and it was great actually. We got so embedded in it, and it was a very sort of empowering experience in many respects for us, as well as for them, I think. We wanted people to think about graphic design in all respects. So in terms of, we work with 3D designers called Universal Design Studio, and we said to them, we want every section to be like an icon if you look at it from above. So this is in plan form, so you've got a question mark for the section on education and H for hospitals and so on. And this is how it looked. You were greeted by the Red Cross, which actually I think in some ways is the best symbol to talk about, because it's a mark of neutrality for medics in war zones, and it's so well known, and it's so clean and simple, isn't it? But so impactful. So a lovely super graphic going around the wall. Obviously we designed it as well, so it's Bit of hospital curtain there, you can see on the H. There's the ambulance. This is the section looking at medication. Another view across the space. And we published a book that went with it too. The fantastic and very ironic thing now is that it got great press coverage, but this is amazing what it says. Health crisis, global epidemic. Quick call the graphic designer. Who would have thought? So this was in 2017. Anyway, we were very buoyed up by this, and at the same time, we were talking to the Design Museum in London about a show to do with graphic design, but we proposed it should be graphic design and politics. And we did this show. It was called Hope to Nope. Very different to Save Your Life in that it just looked at a 10-year period, 2008 to 2018. So, which, you know, arguably at the time had been more turbulent than most of us could remember, but I mean, I guess it's continued in that way in many respects. Of course, it's called Hope to Nope because it was sort of bookended by the Barack Obama Hope poster through to memes with Nope and Trump on them. Very, very different curatorial experience because, you know, we curated Save Your Life and we also curated this. And Save Your Life, lots of research, we had quite a long time to do it. This was done really, really, really fast. It was designed to look quite chaotic, intentionally. And we were often trying to find work that wasn't made by professionals. And that in itself became difficult because quite often we were drawing upon sort of underground people who were producing bits of graphic design but were really didn't want to be found, you know, and we were showing bits of work that had made their lives actually at risk, put their lives at risk, you know, graphic design in some places. You've got to be really careful what the messages are that you're disseminating, and you probably don't want somebody to know that you made them. So it was very hard for us to get the work from people. And we did a book to go with it. And again, we felt kind of quite pleased with ourselves, really. And we got some great press. This is press from Creative Review. You know, yippee, there was our quote from Mike. It all felt like, yeah, great. Another job well done by us, we thought. And then something happened, which was the Design Museum rented out their atrium area for a private event. We didn't know about it, they do it all the time, they rent it out in the evenings. But it happened to be for a company that had some affiliation to the arms industry. And our exhibitors happened to be running an event in the basement on the same day. And you just think, oh my God, you know, well, we got an email from some of our exhibitors saying, did you know about this? Well, no, of course we didn't know about it. We couldn't believe it, actually. And it really quickly hit the press because some of our exhibitors started to think, well, I'm going to take my work out. And then that just completely snowballed. So it went from people at Occupy wanting to take their work out to Pentagram wanting to take their work out. And the whole thing just kind of fell apart, actually. And it made the New York Times, and there were protests outside. But actually what was fantastic, although we felt deeply upset to see our exhibition dismantled, was that it really showed that designers cared. They really, really cared. And they were going to stand up for what they believed was right. And actually the Design Museum, who, you know, sadly had not done due diligence on who was renting the space, I think it was a bit of a wake-up call for them, too. And then our exhibitors put on an alternative version of the exhibition in Brixton, which is this. But of course, what really this is about is funding. That the Design Museum is not state funded, they rely upon ticket sales, and they're also under-resourced in terms of people power. So, you know, things like this can slip through the net quite easily. And I think at that point, although I've been thinking a lot about this for some time previously, you start to think this whole, you know, trying to do the right thing, being a good designer and think about ethics, you can be surprised by how suddenly you're implicated in something that you didn't know about and you don't want to be affiliated to. But we were left in this very difficult position caught between our exhibitors and the museum, because these were people we knew personally in the museum who were of course horrified but also didn't really know how to handle it. And that brings me on to something else which is becoming even more personal in terms of my professional life. You probably know about Extinction Rebellion, who are the climate change activists, and you know, I've had some involvement with XR. But last week, they've been doing quite a few actions in the last couple of weeks. They posted these pictures outside the Science Museum about funding for the Science Museum that's coming from Shell. Well, we're in the middle of a project for the Science Museum. So, you know, suddenly, again, it's just like, oh God, what does one do about that? And it brings up all sorts of issues about not only how the arts are funded or cultural bodies are funded, but actually how difficult it is, even if you want to be ethically good, to do that, because you don't know often where money's coming from. And at what point do you say, well, I just can't, actually maybe this is where the letter comes in really, maybe I just can't do this anymore because I don't know how to feel okay about it, and because you're really compromised. And alongside that, I've been thinking a lot about the process as a graphic designer anyway, and how it's changed since I was younger. I posted this on Instagram a while ago, and it says, tend to think it's time to intend to stop tending to the tendering. And that's because within the cultural sector, you tender for projects unpaid, always now, you know. And this idea that it's okay for us to be working for free, how is that okay? And what do I do about that? And how do I stand up to it? And again, you know, I feel compromised by it. I suspect museums are not asking lawyers to work for free. So it says something about our business, that, you know, we're not valued in the way that other professionals are. Also, are there too many of us? That's a very difficult subject, isn't it? You know, there's been a massive increase in number of students. You know, is that part of the problem? Is, you know, it's the market decides. You know, but this is all really, really uncomfortable. Another example, the UN during the pandemic had this global call to creatives. We need you to produce bits of work to explain about COVID. We need it to come from all over the world because we're trying to reach all sorts of different communities. That all sounded really great. Creative Review promoted it. It's nice that promoted it. You know, great. You know, this was the brief, which incidentally kind of takes away copyright from those designers. But, you know, lots of people produce lots of amazing, very different work. Sounds great, but of course no one was paid. You know, but of course designers want to do it. They want to help. I just thought, God, this is really conflicting. This is really, really difficult. And of course it's all about economics. Really, it's all about economics, which is a subject I'm really interested in. And I discovered this woman, Kate Rayworth, whose book is on the bedside table, who's come up with this thing called donut economics. And what she talks about actually is how, and she's talking about poverty, inequality, and the climate and the relationship between all these things. So if you imagine the donut, which is the green area, she talks about this sweet spot, which is the green area. And she talks about how we're failing the climate, that's the outer area, but we're also failing lots and lots of people on the planet, because some people are very, very rich, very, very privileged, and lots of people are not. And these are two things we've got to solve. You can't just think about the climate in an isolated way. I found this really, really interesting. And that brings me on to why I've been wearing a t-shirt that says it's the end of graphic design as we know it, which is a bit provocative, clearly. But it was partly because I was working on a project called Non-Pavilion as part of the London Design Festival in 2019. And unlike most of the pavilions at the festival, it kind of was almost not there, which is why it's called Non-Pavilion. It's just these 4 poles. And people were given iPads and they looked at bits of AR that were all about climate change. So it was a kind of, you know, almost invisible pavilion. Here's lots of people engaging with it, lovely. And we worked on the sort of identity, the interpretation, and we did a piece of AR for it. But of course what's really difficult about it is it on the panel, the intro panel, it says, as creators of new and desirable things, the design community is complicit in the current climate. So it's not only that we're all worried and scared about it, we're actually to blame. I said, oh my God, this is just getting worse and worse. And, you know, but of course, you know, most graphic design is about the buying and selling of goods that arguably people don't need, and they throw away. And so the question is, you know, in a post-growth world, what might the role of design be? What does that mean for all of us? You know, these are really difficult. I don't have the answers, I hasten to add, but I'm just really troubled by it all. So these were some of the assets that we produced that say provocative things like degrowth equals de-design, you know. And we produced a piece of AR which was called Can We Balance the World? And essentially it was 3 staircases. This is how we started it, because we've never done a piece of augmented reality before. So we started with these drawings of 3 staircases and thinking about how you might have a sphere that rolls down them and gradually they come into some sort of harmony and balance. And each staircase, one represents profit, one represents people, and the other the planet. And that was how it looked. And we did an event that was called Is It in Graphic Design as We Know It? Which clearly, when you read the letter, you'll see that I do still love graphic design. I love being a graphic designer. But I'm getting more and more worried about being a graphic designer, and I don't know what to do about that. And that's really what this letter is about. It's just, well, what do I do next? I'm just going to end with something that I hope will amuse rather than being sinister, which is that at the end of my letter, I talk about this phrase, "You're a long time dead," which I keep thinking about now, partly because of my own age. And really it's a kind of, you know, you're a long time dead, so how do you make the best of being alive? And I'm spending a lot of time thinking, well, you can go one of 2 ways, it seems to me. You can become completely hedonistic by the time you get to my age and go, sod it, I'm just going to have a really lovely time because I'll be dead soon. Or you think, no, I've really got to think even harder about these things, and I have to change, something has to change. So I asked my daughter, who is 13, to say something.
Hi to everyone who's watching out there. You're a long time dead.
Let me crawl out from under the bed. And maybe you can have the light on, so it's pretty dark. Oh, wow. Right. Are there any questions?
Well, I had one when you were starting teaching, sort of like in the engineering school, kind of. Well, I'm studying graphic design myself, for 3 or 4 years now, and we came across during the topic of sort of how we as graphic designers sort of producing also waste, and how we are also part of the system of creating this waste, even though I wasn't aware that much, but I mean, as soon as we create something on the computer or so, and we save it somewhere, and we save a new version, and we save a new version, and so on and so on. It's becoming more and more waste, and I'm just curious how you what you think about it, how this is gonna change, or how you cope with this in
Personally?
Yeah.
Well, that's what's really troubling me actually, is that even though I try really, really hard to be, and I don't think it's about, you know, the conversation has definitely moved on from recycled paper, which is where it was a few years ago. Surely that's not. You know. It seems to me we need a completely different economic system, and that's really frightening, isn't it? It's really frightening. It could be great. I did think with COVID, oh, this could be the beginning of a real rebalancing, and actually it might still turn out to be the case. Don't know. But you know, personally, you see, the thing that's difficult for me, what's rubbing up against each other, if you like, is that we have not done very commercial work ever, but we've been able to do that because of government funding for projects, which has been pulled away in the UK recently. So that's been, you know, and we've worked on it in the cultural sector and for NGOs and charities and so on. But they are becoming more vulnerable, and also as as I was saying, really, where their funding is coming from is more questionable, which is, of course, making me feel really, really uncomfortable. But as I say, I do still love it. And I don't know, I think one of the questions is, well, do you make more work for free? Do you just, which at the same time runs counter to what I think we should be doing as professionals. But in another way, I can see that there's an argument to do that. Because you're taking you have a different power when you're doing something for free, or you should do.
Well, this for sure, but I just like, since like I came across this topic, I just like each time when I start a new project, it's sort of part of my thinking pattern, and I think like obviously not only about like sort of like what kind of paper I use or like what kind of materials I use, but like it's like kind of like also what kind of softwares I use, like where like because like I mean like all these like server farms, like I mean like gonna take space away like in more poor countries and like more like I don't know, like it's just such a big like I don't know, like it's sometimes maybe that's like this dilemma sort of like of loving it and like kind of also like being afraid of it in a way.
Yeah. All I can say is I feel the same.
Yeah.
Hence all this really. Yeah. But it doesn't mean I don't love being a graphic designer. That's the problem.
So Lucienne, putting yourself in the shoes of graphic design replying, was that
well,
convincing?
Well, it's kind of interesting because graphic design said back to me, you know, you wanted me to be something I'm not. It's you, this is you. And in a way that's true, because graphic design, of course, really is neutral, isn't it? It's what we make of it. But it's true that I invested all this hope in it for doing a particular thing. And for a long time, sort of went la 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 to the rest of it. I just didn't really, I just avoided doing it, but I didn't really engage with the repercussions of it. So that was one message, is kind of, you know, well, you wanted me to be something, but I never was. You misjudged who I am. So that was one of the answers, which is, you know, a fair comment in a way. You know. But it was quite hard writing the answer back. Also, I couldn't work out whether the graphic design would be cross. You know, I thought that she probably would be. It's
oh, is it he or she?
They, well, yeah, who knows? I mean, but you know, they, yeah, but you know, so. Yeah.
Thanks, Lucy, that was wonderful. Just referring to the exhibition, I was wondering what you're going to do with the responses at the end of the exhibition.
Yeah, you know, we haven't talked about that. We should do something with them. Definitely, that's a really good idea. It'd be great, because I suppose what I really, really hope is that people are honest in their replies. And even though there is definitely quite a lot of humour in this, clearly in terms of your answer, I was just worried about, because I just hadn't even thought about having an affair. But, you know, so it's just like, wow, okay, that's an option. But, you know, so I think we could maybe do something with those.
Yeah,
we'll see what they're like.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
It is, I really must say, like, we all did, you know, also, like, Eva and Johanna, we did it, and I thought it was a really super interesting process of really going like, yeah, actually, what is my relationship to graphic design?
Yeah.
You know, how do I feel about it? How, you know, what's that? So it's, I can absolutely recommend it. It's a really, like, and addressing it in kind of first person is also a really interesting exercise.
I think, you know, as but as graphic designers, there's also this weird thing, because we're all pretty obsessed by it, aren't we? We've talked about this, that, you know, but it's quite hidden, because our clients would think we were mad to be so bothered about it. They really would. They think we're completely bonkers. I mean, I think even like design conferences and things, they just wouldn't believe that we all troop off and listen to each other talking about graphic design. What? you know. So there's all that as well. It's quite a strange, closed world, which is what, you know, I just, even though everybody uses it, it's everywhere, but, you know, hardly anybody really understands why we're so bothered about it. So, sorry.
I think this is a bit in relation to what you just said. I kind of have two questions. So, you kind of talking in your letter about this kind of love-hate relationship with graphic design. So when you feel maybe terrified of design, how do you find your way back to design? How do you meet again with design so you can create something that makes sense. And the other thing is, you've talked about these books that you've created that reflect on these different subjects. It was really interesting to hear that you've actually met with people that have really different jobs, and you've managed to find anything that overlaps with design. So what was an interesting find, and who as a person, as a job, like where did that come from, like with this interesting overlapping of the subject with design?
Well, in terms of that, I think, so the GDN books, we always have some relationship with an expert in their field, and the maths one was probably the one that I found most interesting in some respects, because we decided we were going to ask lots and lots of designers to help other people understand the golden section. And we had a mathematician help us, and we had to, when everyone had submitted their ideas, we took them to him and thought, he's going to say none of these work. And we're going to feel really, really embarrassed. But he didn't. He was absolutely overjoyed, and it got picked up by Montessori schools and all sorts of things, and it became a thing. And so that was really brilliant, because it felt like it was really worth communicating properly with experts in other fields. In terms of feeling a bit better about it, that's why I showed the thing for Southampton, actually, because I found it really interesting talking to this other professor. It made me think about engineering completely differently, so I learned something, but it also allowed me, I learned lots of things actually. I wrote the text, but I do write anyway, but it was a poem effectively, so I don't often write poems, and that was good. And then I worked with an animator called Paul Bellman on turning it, and a sound designer called Malcolm Goldie about how to turn it into this moving thing. And I learned a lot. That was a proper collaborative thing. And because of the subject matter, I thought it was okay to be doing it. and I was learning a lot creatively at the same time. And actually that's sort of the dream project.
And what is the animation like used for, or like?
It's up on the. What I find interesting with engineering actually is that they talk about engineering as a design discipline, which I also haven't completely appreciated before. And so because it's not about what it looks like, it's about the idea of the intention, the planning, and so on, which makes perfect sense once you think about it. So they do a design show, just like we would do a design show. So we've worked on their site for the most recent design show. It's up there, and then we're using it when we're talking to them about climate change and so on. No, I hope you don't feel too disheartened. Angst.
I have a last question. Thanks a lot for your representation again. Would you say that the situation that we are in right now is mostly because of the design education that we are also using in school? Because you just had this great example when you had this collaboration with engineers, and they're having this design show. But for example, we as designers at school, we never had any kind of classes about climate change or the current issues that we're dealing with.
But that surely is heading our way for students. It must be. It's just so critical, isn't it?
I think it differs from school, right? I think we had it quite much, I would say, topics we got taught in a way about it, but I think it's depending on the school program.
Yeah, that's also true, but at the same time, I still think the extent to which we have to be exposed to is very little.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I can't see how that can continue really.
But in any case, I think it's good also as a student. I think it's also a question of kind of staying aware, staying curious, and kind of investigating yourself. And it's also something I appreciate a lot about Lucienne's practice, that she was really curious about what's happening in other areas, and kind of trying to kind of bring this into her thinking and her design and her way of living. Because I think also we shouldn't really distinguish those two. And I think this is also what I like very much about you turning this into a ladder, a love ladder, or kind of turning the relationship with graphic design into a personal relationship, because I think, can we really separate it from the way we live? You know, it shouldn't be separated from what we believe and how we want to live and how we want to be in the world. So I think our professional practice, our graphic design should just be an extension of that. So that's also why, you know.
Yeah. And also I think, you know, one of the things I sort of didn't talk about directly is that, you know, when I think the real dilemma for a lot of us is that there's an assumption now made by charities, NGOs, the cultural sector, that you'll be working for not much money, and because that's probably that your work is being subsidised by somebody else, but they don't want to ask who that is. You know, and that's something we all have to think about. We have to be really aware of, I think. So that's the unspoken assumption. You know, I think the cultural sector, for example, they should talk about us as sponsors, not designers, because we're giving loads of our time for free. But they think it's still a fair swap, but it isn't, and we can only do it because of doing other sorts of work. And they don't, you know, they don't want to hear about that. You know, and this is a real dilemma for all of us. So, you know, somehow we've got to earn a living. And somehow we want to still sleep at night and feel okay about ourselves. It's really difficult. Really difficult.
I would just maybe like to also say like that this, like maybe also what you say, that like the students should like search themselves and be curious, and I think of course it's true, but also like not everybody is coming, like you have to come with certain, like I don't know, like skills, or like if you come to university and you are, I don't know, 20, like I think it's very important that the input is coming in, like because like I don't know, people come from different backgrounds, like not everybody has this like capacity maybe as a 20-year-old to like say, oh, I want to learn more about like, I don't know, some social issues, and the same maybe comes with like this work for the NGOs and like very little paid work or like unpaid work. I also think like not everybody can afford it, and I think that's also something what we should be aware of.
But that's another thing, there's a lot of talk about representation now in graphic design, but nobody talks about, if you're doing good work and you're not being paid enough, is it mummy and daddy that are helping? Probably.
Probably, you know, and I think like that's
again,
also
not talked about. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your lecture. And what I'm thinking right now is quite interesting that this room is somehow divided in two parts. So there are some women, we all know each other, which are your age, and there are many women which are studying, and I think this is quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
That this part of the room is really having the same experience like you have. And we are also thinking a lot about this. So there are some graphic designers, many of them are men. In our age, they get artists. This is what I'm, maybe Patrick, I don't know. Yeah, they get artists because somehow they are bored of not getting paid.
Yeah.
The others, they get professors, they get teachers. And the other thing is you have to have large jobs, yeah, and you have a lot of responsibility. You have employees, and you get somehow in a direction of architect or another profession which gets well paid. But what you learn in university, you can do for some years, and then exactly happens what you are telling about. And I think this is quite interesting in this room right now. Yeah, what you say is absolutely what we are experiencing.
Mm. Yeah, but we're very hopeful. Well, no pressure.
No, I think there's a lot of pressure, especially because of climate change. So my daughter is also studying, I don't know whether it's good or not, interface design, and each topic in each class, it's only about climate change, it's only about no future, and I always think, how can these young people go in this direction? You must get crazy somehow.
Well, it's tough, I'm sure. Yeah.
also study, and I'm not a graphic designer. But I do think that it's actually quite a bit harder for our generation to get back to that critical thinking which these young people grew up with. And what you're experiencing, we in the museum are experiencing as well, that we lose the ground, the very safe ground that we've held.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And
yeah.
we come sort of from the back doors.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference as well, I think.
Yeah.
It's like you're more insecure in your insecurities.
Yes.
My son is much more secure in the criticisms he has with the work. So, yeah. So.
I just thank you very much. That it was great as always. Like, but I want to ask like a question that's really a little bit like a little bit devil's advocate, but like because we were talking now about graphic design being well paid, and like might it be that like maybe the intention, which I think is in a lot of schools also taught, of doing good is actually the problem. Because if we would kind of, because in some countries like Switzerland, like they're just doing everything. Like so they're doing commercial work, they don't have any qualms about it, and they make a living because a lot of the things that graphic designers should be doing out there are done, at least in Germany, by advertising agencies, by people who didn't study graphic design, who don't have any intention to do good, they just want to make money. And the result is in the end bad graphic design, like for advertising, and for graphic designers who then have to become artists in the end to make more money, which is not weird.
Yeah, and there's the whole argument about changing from within, isn't there? That designers who are, you know, that it's possible to make a change by, you might have more influence by taking more corporate work or more commercial work and then suggesting, you know, there's that argument too, of course. Yeah, absolutely. It's not an easy one.
Okay, Gustav continues.
I have to say thank, I really have to, I should say a big thank you to you because it's such a, it's inconclusive. I'm just sort of going, oh help, you know, and and it's very personal and a bit odd. So I'm really grateful that you've let me try and work it out, sort of, even though I haven't come up with the answers. But, so. And obviously thanks to all my colleagues in London and Lynn here, who's my sounding board with the whole thing. And yeah.
Lucienne, thank you.